I'm Jonathan Mann in Manchester, New Hampshire, a part of the world that doesn't get a whole lot of excitement, but some of it has rolled into town over the past few weeks, and it's peaking just about now. People across this state are voting in the United States' first presidential primary. We'll have a closer look coming up on a special edition of Insight in just a moment. This is Mystery Hill, about an hour's drive from Manchester in New Hampshire. It's billed as America's Stonehenge, a prehistoric complex of caves and stone structures that is said to be unexplained. Like the New Hampshire primary, there may be less here or more than meets the eye. It's hard to know. Welcome back from Manchester. Expectations play an enormous role in how the results this evening are going to be interpreted. Pollsters try to predict the outcome long before any voter has even gone to the polls. Newspapers and television offer their opinions on who the frontrunners are as well. And the candidates themselves try to play those expectations to their own advantage, playing the press and the pundits against each other and against their competitors. Joining us now to talk about all this is B.J. Rudell, author of Only in New Hampshire. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Everyone says it's the cliche here that the polls don't really mean much. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen in New Hampshire. Right. Why is that?
Well, New Hampshire voters are used to having the fortune of being able to nominate someone from their state. And every 4 years, they're accustomed to having that responsibility and that pride. So when it comes down to voting, they like to surprise people. They like to go with their gut. They like to look at character. Those are things that aren't judged by polls.
Sometimes they surprise themselves, and the reason I say that is because depending on who you trust, maybe 3 out of 10 or 2 or 1 out of 10 voters didn't know who they were going to vote for as they went to the polls today. But the polls, the public opinion surveys do say that John Kerry was the front runner. Given everything you just said, given the uncertainty, do you trust the polls? You were out today.
I was out today. I saw some poll watchers, folks who were trying to get people to vote for their candidate at the polls. And that's a sign of, pride in the candidate. We saw a lot of equal poll people from all across the candidates. I think Kerry is the front runner right now based on his win in Iowa, and Dean is running second according to most of the polls. What they have to do is surprise the media, all these candidates. They have to surprise the nation.
Let me ask you more about that. They have to surprise the media because we're going to get one empirical measure of public support in just a short time. We're going to see the numbers that people actually got. But in some ways, the numbers really don't matter, do they?
Not as much. For example, John Edwards is running 3rd or 4th right now, depending on the poll you're looking at. He's focusing on South Carolina because he's from neighboring North Carolina. So winning in New Hampshire for him is not as important, and because he's down on the polls, he can spend more time in other states.
A relatively small number of voters actually cast their ballots in this state. This is a state of about 1 million people, 700,000 registered voters, and if there's a record turnout, it will be under 200,000 people. Under 200,000 people, disproportionately white and affluent, having a hard time making up their minds, nonetheless playing an enormous role in who may end up in the White House. Does that make sense to you?
I've talked to a lot of voters, and they always say that they feel a great deal of responsibility for casting that vote. And when you grow up in a state where you know you have that responsibility, you really take the time to get to know the candidates. These are voters who don't want to just get to know the candidate on TV, but want to go out and meet the candidate not once, but 3 or 4 times sometimes. So they really do make the effort in a way that folks in other states like California and New York that are bigger may not be able to do.
That having been said, the big issue, if there is a big issue this year, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is electability. And what electability seems to suggest is that voters are looking at the polls. In fact, they're looking at what pollsters are predicting. Our pollsters basically are people in the media generating these self-fulfilling prophecies. They put someone ahead, voters tend to follow who they think is ahead because in New Hampshire they want a winner so badly.
That's very true, and you can't stop polls from happening. They are reflective of what the people think in a moment in time. A lot of voters in New Hampshire are savvy enough to know that it is just a moment in time, and they might change their mind in the last day. A neighbor might come up to them and say, you know what, here's why you should vote for candidate X. And that person may change their mind after hearing from a trusted friend.
Now, another oddity about the polling system here is that independents or undeclared New Hampshireites can vote. In fact, you go to the polls, you declare yourself a Democrat on a form, you go and cast a ballot, and then on the way out you get another form and declare yourself to be an independent again. Right. How much does that skew the result? Once again, a very small number of people voting and a very big pool of candidates.
I talked to a woman today who did that, and the fact is it tries to get more people involved in the process. New Hampshire is known for its independent streak. There's more independents than there are registered Republicans or registered Democrats. So by allowing independents to vote, it allows people to fluctuate between Republican primaries like in 2000 Democratic primaries.
I got a sense in this race, Joe Lieberman was actually running for Republican votes in the Democratic primary.
That's exactly right. He was looking for McCain voters and Republican voters who were disenfranchised with the Bush administration or just felt that they wanted someone who was more moderate. And he paraded around 1,000 independents who supported his cause. Unfortunately for him, at least according to the polls, it hasn't caught on yet.
How much pressure is there from the rest of the country to take away this privilege from New Hampshire because it's small, it's odd, it's quirky, and it's unrepresentative?
Well, there are a lot of folks, and I'm not from New Hampshire, and I can speak just from experience and having worked there 4 years ago for 6 months. There is a lot of pressure to take away their first-in-the-nation status. But having worked there and met with the people, my sense is that they really take it so seriously that it would be hard to move it to another state and have the same kind of results.
Now, one of the reasons that it's so meaningful to the whole country, especially to the people in New Hampshire, is generally the results really matter. Are they going to really matter this year, or is the race so tight and just, I don't know what the right way to describe it, amorphous, I guess?
It's true. It's very hard to predict, and I would say that in terms of, again, surprising people's expectations, Kerry and Dean are probably going to survive no matter what. They have the money, and Kerry has the front-runner status to do it. As Edwards, there's not less pressure, but folks like Lieberman and Clark and Kucinich and Sharpton, they need to be looking at these results that are going to come out tonight and decide, are they ready to mount a challenge in the next 7 states?
Well, Clark says he has the money. You've just told us that Edwards has the money and has the expectation he'll go on. Howard Dean has the money and the expectation. John Kerry has the money. We talked to Dennis Kucinich, who says, though he doesn't have any money, he's ready to go on. There could be 5 or 6 candidates even emerging from here.
That's true. Sometimes there's a lot of pressure because these are all Democratic candidates. They all want to serve the party in some way, even if it's a small way. And if a lot of people in the Democratic Party sometimes will say, you know what, you've had your run, it's time to step aside, sometimes that can be enough. For folks like Dennis Kucinich and Al Sharpton who have more independent streaks, it might be harder to do. But even someone like John McCain and Bill Bradley 4 years ago, who ran a more independent campaign, eventually saw the writing on the wall and they stepped aside for the good of the party.
Okay, there are still people at the polls. They're going to be out for another 2.5 hours.
Right.
What's your bold prediction?
Well, with Kerry and Dean right now leading in the polls, they certainly have the edge. Edwards, no matter what, is going to be okay as long as he can maintain some kind of expectation of double digits. As for the others, it's hard to say. I talked to a bunch of different voters out there who are for different candidates, and they're all passionate about their candidates. And that's the beauty of New Hampshire, is when people vote, when they finally get behind someone, they know why they're doing it.
B.J. Rudell, author of Only in New Hampshire. Thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you, Jonathan, very much.